Hey, my name is Ethan. I'm 32. I edit other people's words for a living in visible work. Quiet life. Same train every evening. Same seat. Same nothing. Then one October night, a woman in a navy coat sat beside me, stared straight ahead, and whispered, "I have a secret." Then she got off at the next stop. The seat still smelled like vanilla. Weeks later, standing on my front steps in the dark, she looked at me and said, "You're not safe, Ethan. You're just honest. And that's harder." If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I used to think routines were a kind of armor. Wake up at the same time, eat the same breakfast, walk the same 6 blocks to the train, sit in the same seat, come home, sleep, repeat. Nothing could touch you inside a routine like that. Nothing could surprise you. And nothing, not loneliness. Not the quiet feeling that your life was passing you by in the exact same way. Every single day could find a gap to crawl through. That was what I told myself. Anyway, my name is Ethan, 32 years old. Freelance editor. Small apartment, quiet work. I sat at a desk and cleaned up other people's words for a living. Invisible work. The kind that suited someone like me just fine. I didn't have a car, didn't need one. The 6:14 evening train took me home in 40 minutes, and I had ridden it so many times I knew every sound it made. The low hum between stations, the screech of the doors at platform 4, the flicker of the yellow lights near Millbrook Street. I always sat in the same seat, third car from the back, window side, second row, bag on the seat beside me so no one would sit there. Most nights the car never quite filled up. I was good at being left alone. That changed on a Tuesday in October. The platform was crowded that evening. A delayed earlier train had backed everything up. Different faces, louder energy than usual. I squeezed through, found my car, found my row. My seat was taken. A woman sat in the window seat with a kind of stillness that made it clear she wasn't moving. Dark navy coat, collar turned up, hair pulled back, a few loose strands catching the yellow light. She was staring at the platform outside, though there was nothing out there worth staring at. She was older than me, 40, maybe a little more. Beautiful the way some women are when they're not trying, not performing, just present, a little tired, a little somewhere else. I stood there a second longer than I needed to. Then I sat down beside her. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then her voice came low, unhurried, like she'd been deciding whether to say it for a while. "I have a secret," shell still facing the window. Hands folded in her lap. A simple white gold ring on her finger. She didn't look at me after she said it. Didn't explain, just let those 4 words sit in the air between us like smoke. A minute later her stop came. She stood, smoothed her coat, walked off the train without looking back. I sat there for the rest of the ride with the echo of her voice in my ears, and the faint smell of vanilla perfume still in the air. I didn't sleep well that night. The next evening I almost sat somewhere else. Something about the night before felt like the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet. And I wasn't sure I wanted one. I went to my usual seat anyway. She was already there. Same seat, same coat. She closed her book the moment I sat down, didn't put it away, just closed it and rested it on her knee. We didn't speak the entire ride, but the silence had weight this time. Awareness, like both of us knew the other was there, and had decided quietly, consciously, not to run from it. Near the back of the car an older man sat with a folded newspaper on his lap. White hair, heavy coat. I'd seen him before without knowing his name. He wasn't reading. He was watching passengers, the way some people watch whether not for information, just out of habit. He glanced at us once, then looked away. She got off at her stop. Before stepping through the doors, she turned her head slightly, not fully, just enough that I caught the edge of her profile in the fading light. Her chin lifted, almost imperceptibly. Then she was gone. It wasn't random. That was the thought that followed me home. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. Third evening. I arrived 9 minutes early. I'd never done that in 3 years of riding this train. I noticed it about myself and felt almost embarrassed. She came through the crowd, found the car, found the row, sat down. The train moved, the lights swayed. "I have a secret," she said again. Same low tone. But this time there was the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth. "You said that already?" I said, "I know." "Does that mean you're going to tell me what it is?" "No, not yet." A pause. The kind that doesn't feel empty. "I noticed you first," she said. "Weeks ago, you were always in the same seat. Always had your bag beside you so no one would sit there." A small exhale. I thought that was either very rude or very lonely. "Which did you decide?" "I'm still deciding." I watched her reflection in the dark window instead of looking directly at her. It felt safer that way. Like watching something through a pane of water. Real, but slightly removed. She got off at her stop, didn't look back. I was already thinking about tomorrow. Fourth evening. She told me she'd chosen me deliberately. That she'd been watching for a while and one day decided to sit down. "Why?" I asked. "You looked safe," she said simply. I sat with that word. Safe. Safe isn't very exciting, I said. No, but it's rare. The train rolled into the dark tunnel stretch, and the windows turned black and reflective. I could see both of us in the glass. Her face in profile, the loose strand of hair, the collar of her coat. I looked at my own reflection and wondered what she saw. A man in a gray jacket who'd structured his entire life so nothing could surprise him. She had surprised him. She got off at her stop. I sat with the specific weight of being chosen by someone you didn't expect. It's heavier than you'd think. Settles differently than attention from someone you were hoping to impress. I didn't know what to do with it yet. Fifth evening. It worked that day. Lena had looked at me over a coffee with that particular expression she had, the one that meant she was cataloging something. You've read that same paragraph 4 times, she said. I told her I was tired. She looked at me 1 second too long, then went back to her screen. On the train, Claire asked me my name. I learned hers. She asked casually, like it wasn't significant. But neither of us said it casually. We said our names. The way you say something you've been waiting to say without knowing you were waiting? Ethan, she repeated softly, like she was testing the weight of it. The train hit the curve near Millbrook Street and jolted. Her knee pressed against mine for a half-second. Neither of us moved. The moment held. The train straightened. Her knee stayed barely, just enough. I went home and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while. Not upset, not quite excited, just sitting with the fact that I hadn't pulled away, and knowing what that meant. 6th evening, she mentioned her husband the way you mention weather. No emotion around it, no bitterness or affection, just a fact. My husband prefers to drive. He thinks public transit is for people who haven't figured out their lives yet. I looked at her ring for the first time, really looked. White gold, simple. It fit her hand the way something does when it's been there a long time. Not decorative, just present. She'd never hidden it. It had always been there. We'd both known it was there, and proceeded anyway. When she stepped off that evening, the doors closed between us with their familiar screech, and I watched her walk the platform through the glass. She didn't look back, and I noticed she'd never once turned the ring inward. She wasn't pretending this was something it wasn't. I respected that, even as I sat there knowing I was coming back tomorrow. 7th evening, there's a particular kind of almost, not an almost, that leads somewhere. Just a pure, suspended moment where the world contracts to the space between two people, and neither of them makes it smaller or larger. Time just holds. The train lurched harder than usual. My hand slid from my knee toward hers, not touching. An inch away, maybe less. Her hand didn't move. For 4 seconds we were like that, neither of us breathing quite normally, the yellow lights doing their flicker overhead. Then her hand moved back to her lap, slowly, like a decision, not a reflex. Mr. Halpern, I'd started calling him that in my head, had his newspaper open, but his eyes were elsewhere. He'd noticed us. I was certain of that by now. I went home knowing this was no longer harmless. I'd known that for a while, but I'd been letting myself pretend otherwise. The way you pretend you haven't already decided something when really the decision was made 3 steps ago. 8th evening. She seemed distant at first, somewhere else in her mind, only part of her on the train. We sat without talking for most of the ride, and that was okay. We'd gotten comfortable with silence. With her, it never felt like a gap. It felt like an agreement. Near her stop, she stood, tugged her coat straight. Then she turned and looked at me, not the peripheral almost glance I'd been getting. A direct look. Will you be here tomorrow? I nodded without hesitating. She walked off. The doors closed. I pressed my fingers against my eyes for a second. Because I knew what I'd just agreed to. Not a train ride. Not a commute. She was asking if I was in choosing this the way she was choosing it. Deliberately, eyes open, and I'd said yes. Because I wasn't going to stop, I already knew that. The decision was made somewhere around the 4th evening. Maybe the 3rd. Maybe the 1st. Maybe the moment I heard I have a secret and felt something in my chest. Leaned forward. I walked home in the October dark. Damp leaves, exhaust, the faint sweetness of someone's takeout from a restaurant I passed. Unlocked my apartment. Stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I sat down and tried to work, and mostly just thought about the way she'd looked at me before stepping off the directness of it. The absence of any pretending. She knew what she was doing. I knew what I was doing. And somehow that felt more honest than a lot of the things I'd done that I was supposed to be fine with. The platform was thick with umbrellas. The train was delayed. The board kept pushing the time back, in 5-minute increments that felt like small wounds. By then we'd exchanged full names. Claire Whitmore. She'd offered it without ceremony, like she'd decided to give me a little more of herself, and wasn't going to make a performance of it. I gave her mine. Cole, Ethan. That sounds like a name that belongs to someone who reads a lot, she'd said. I edit for a living. Close enough. She'd almost laughed. Not quite, but close enough that I felt it in my sternum. In that rainy evening she looked at the board, then at me. There's a cafe around the corner. I've walked past it before. I knew the place. green awning, fogged up windows. You want to wait there? She looked at me a moment. Yes, I think I do. We walked under her umbrella, slightly too small for two people. Her shoulder was against my arm the whole half block. Neither of us commented. The cafe was warm and nearly empty. We took a small table in the back. She kept her coat on. I kept mine. She wrapped both hands around her cup the way you do when you're cold and grateful for warmth. Under these lights, warmer, more direct than the train's yellow glow, she looked different, more real. I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes. The tiredness she usually held so carefully now sat closer to the surface. I haven't done this in a long time, she said. Had coffee? A small exhale. Sat somewhere with someone and not been performing. What are you usually performing? She looked at her cup. Contentment. Mostly, it landed the way true things land, quietly and with weight. I haven't felt seen in years, she said. Not dramatically. The way you say a fact you've mostly made peace with, except for the moments when you haven't. Not looked at, seen, like someone's actually paying attention to the specific shape of you. The table was small. Our cups were 6 inches apart. I could see where her lipstick had worn off at the center of her lower lip. The exact color of her eyes. Gray-green, like deep water. You pay attention, she said softly. I noticed that from the beginning. The rain came down outside. Our foreheads didn't touch, but for one moment they were close enough that it would have taken almost nothing. Neither of us moved. Then she sat back and looked toward the window, and the moment passed the way those moments do. We walked back to the platform in fine mist, her umbrella between us. At the grip, both our hands landed on the handle at the same time, her fingers and mine, briefly together, before I stepped back and let her hold it. On the train, she sat a little closer than before. No words needed. When she got off, she looked back through the window as the train began to move. Just for a second. Then she was gone. I rode home through the dark city, lights flickering past the wet glass, her perfume faint on my collar. My chest felt full of something I didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness, exactly, but something close. Something that had been missing long enough that I'd forgotten to miss it. The days after the cafe were different. Not louder, not more dramatic. Just different, the way a room feels different after someone has been in it. The air slightly rearranged. The furniture in the same place, but somehow more deliberate. We were back on the train the next evening. Same seats, same yellow light, same low hum of the tracks beneath us. But the silence between us now held the memory of the cafe, the warmth of it. The closeness of that small table, the rain on the windows. The way she'd said contentment, mostly like it was a confession she'd been carrying for a long time. She sat a little closer than before. Not dramatically, just a degree or two of lean in, enough that the fabric of her coat occasionally brushed my sleeve. We didn't need to talk about what the cafe had been. We both knew. It had been a step, the first one taken off the train and into something with more light, more exposure, more risk. And we'd taken it together and come back, and neither of us had pretended it hadn't happened. But that felt like its own kind of agreement. She mentioned Sophie for the first time a few evenings later. Not directly, she mentioned her the way you mention, something that's always present but rarely named. She said something about a weekend that was complicated, something about her daughter being home from school. And then she stopped and looked at the window, and I understood she hadn't meant to say that much. How old, I asked? 19? She said. A pause. She's sharp, notices things. She didn't elaborate. But I heard what was underneath it, this reminder, offered quietly, that her life was bigger and more complicated than the 40 minutes she spent on this train. There was a daughter who was sharp and noticed things. There was a husband who thought public transit was for people who hadn't figured out their lives. There was a house somewhere, a life somewhere, a version of Claire Whitmore that existed in rooms I would never see. I felt the weight of that, the reality of it. This wasn't just a woman on a train. It was a person embedded in a whole structure, and the structure had people in it who would be affected by the cracks she was allowing to form. I didn't say any of that, but I thought it, and I think she knew I was thinking it, because she glanced at me once, and then looked back at her hands. Her ring caught the light. She'd be fine, Claire said eventually, in a tone that wasn't convincing either of us. I nodded slowly. We rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a heavier silence than usual, a more honest one. We went back to the cafe. This time it wasn't because of rain or delays, it was a choice, made plainly, without the cover of circumstance. She asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. We walked over together after stepping off the train. It was a Thursday evening, dry and cold, the city doing its usual thing around us, people moving, taxis, a food cart steaming on the corner, ordinary city sounds. But I was aware of how visible we were out here in a way the train didn't make us. The train was its own sealed world. The cafe, the street, the city, that was real life, with real eyes in it. She seemed aware of it too. She walked with a particular kind of composure, not stiff, but careful, like someone who was used to being looked at and had learned to manage it. We sat at the same table in the back. I watched her hands around the coffee cup. She had elegant hands, not in a pampered way, just in the way that some people's hands seem to express something about them. Hers were expressive without moving much. I found myself looking at her ring again. She noticed. She didn't say anything at first. She just followed my gaze down to her own hand, and then looked back up at me with an expression that wasn't quite defensive and wasn't quite apologetic. It was something more tired than either of those things. "It's not what it looks like from the outside," she said. "It never is." "No." She turned the cup slowly. "But I'm not going to tell you it's terrible. It's not terrible. It's just ... quiet." In a way that stopped feeling peaceful a long time ago. I didn't push. She didn't offer more. We sat with it. The ring, the quiet marriage, the distance between what things looked like and what they felt like. The cafe filled up slightly around us, other people's conversations forming a low wall of noise. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something?" she said, "but you can't quite remember what you're waiting for?" I thought about that. "Every day," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Yes," she said softly. "Exactly like that." Our chairs were close. Her knee was near mine under the small table. The tension between us, the thing that had been building in careful increments. Since the first evening had a particular quality in the cafe light. On the train it felt contained, manageable, softened by the movement and the noise. Here it just sat between us, without anywhere to go. We were close, too close for strangers. Not close enough for whatever else this was. Her hand rested on the table between our cups. I didn't touch it, but I was aware of it the entire time we sat there. The specific inches between my hand and hers, the warmth that seemed to come off her even across that gap. We finished our coffee, paid separately again, walked back toward the station. At the corner where she usually turned for her car, she stopped. I stopped beside her. She looked at me, that direct look I'd learned to hold without looking away. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Same time?" I said. She nodded once, and walked away. I stood on the corner for a moment, hands in my jacket pockets, watching her go. The click of her heels on the sidewalk, fading. Then I turned and walked home, and the city felt slightly different around me, louder and quieter at the same time. It was the following Thursday that Daniel appeared. We were at the cafe, our table, the back corner. It had become our table in the way that places become yours when you return to them enough. We'd been there maybe 6 or 7 times by then. The barista knew our orders. We were talking, nothing heavy. One of those conversations that moves easily from small things to slightly larger ones. When the door opened and Claire's posture changed, I noticed it before I noticed him, a slight drawing together of her shoulders, a careful, deliberate settling of her expression into something neutral. I looked toward the door. He was tall, well-dressed, a coat that fit the way expensive coats fit, late 40s, silver at the temples, the kind of face that was handsome in a composed, managed way. He moved through the cafe with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most certain person in any room. He saw her immediately. His expression didn't change, no surprise, no warmth, just recognition. Then his eyes moved to me. Claire stood slightly. "Danya," her voice was perfectly even. "I didn't know you were in this area." "Client dinner fell through," he said, still looking at me. "I thought I'd find somewhere quiet, beat." Claire turned to me with an expression that was calm in the specific way of someone managing several things at once. "This is Ethan. We ride the same train." "Someone from the train." That was what she said. 3 words that were technically true and contained nothing and gave away nothing. She said them easily, without hesitation. Daniel looked at me. He had the kind of eyes that processed information quickly and showed very little of what they'd found. "Daniel Whitmore," he said. He didn't extend a hand. "Ethan Cole," I said. I kept my voice level. He studied me for a moment, not long, but long enough to be a statement. Then he looked back at Claire with an expression I couldn't read. "I'll find another table," he said. "Don't let me interrupt." He moved away toward the front of the cafe. Claire sat back down. She picked up her cup. Her hands were steady. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "I should go," she said quietly. "Okay." She gathered her things slowly, deliberately. At the table's edge she paused just briefly and her eyes met mine. There was something in them I hadn't seen before. Not fear, exactly. More like the particular clarity that comes when something you've been half pretending isn't real suddenly becomes undeniably real. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. Then she walked toward where her husband sat, and I watched her go. And I finished my coffee alone in the back corner of the cafe while the city moved past the fogged windows. I paid. I walked out. The evening air hit me cold and immediate. I didn't look back through the window to see them. I walked to the train station, rode home, sat at my desk without opening my laptop. Something had shifted. The sealed world of the train had a crack in it now. He existed. He was real and tall and composed, and he'd looked at me the way someone looks at something they've already categorized. I sat in my apartment for a long time that night. She didn't come the next evening. I boarded the 6:14, went to my seat. The train filled, moved, emptied at stops. Her seat stayed empty the entire ride. I watched every door. She wasn't there. I rode home in a silence that felt entirely different from the ones we'd shared together. Those silences had been full of presence, of awareness, of the particular warmth of two people choosing to be near each other. This was just absent. Her seat, empty, the slight impression in the cushion that I was probably imagining by now. The yellow lights flickering at Millbrook Street. Mr. Halpern in his usual spot, newspaper on his knee. He glanced at her empty seat, and then at me, and something in his expression shifted just slightly in a way I couldn't name. He looked back at his paper. I got off at my stop and walked home in the dark. The days after that were their own particular kind of quiet. I still rode the train. Every evening, same time, same seat. Lena noticed at work that I was somewhere else, and one afternoon she sat on the edge of my desk and said, gently, "Ethan, what's going on?" I looked at her. I didn't know how to explain it, not because it was complicated, but because it was delicate in a way that words made clumsy. How do you explain 40 minutes on a train? How do you explain a kind of closeness that never announced itself, never named itself, but was the realest thing you'd felt in years? "I'm fine," I said. She looked at me a long moment. She didn't believe me, but she was kind enough not to press. That evening, I almost didn't board the train. I stood on the platform in the cold and looked at the open doors and thought, what's the point? She wasn't going to be there. She was somewhere in the city with her composed husband and her perceptive daughter, and her life that existed in rooms I'd never see. And the small space we'd carved out between us had probably frightened her back into the shape she was supposed to hold. I boarded the train. I sat in my seat. I watched every stop. She wasn't there. Weeks passed. This is the part that's hard to describe because nothing happened, and yet the nothing was its own kind of weather. I rode the train, and the train was just a train. I went to the cafe once, and sat at the back table, and drank coffee alone, and felt profoundly ridiculous about how much I noticed her absence in a chair. I went home every evening, made dinner, sat at my desk, edited other people's words until late. Every sensory detail had her in it somewhere. Vanilla and a candle someone burned in the office hallway. A dark navy coat on a woman across the street who wasn't her. The flicker of yellow overhead lights anywhere. The low vibration of the train under my feet. Mr. Halpern had said something to me one evening, quietly, as I stood to exit. "Patterns change," he said, without looking up from his paper. "Sometimes they come back." I didn't respond. But I thought about it more than I should have. The weeks had a texture like gray wool, soft but muffling. I was functioning fine, working, eating, sleeping adequately. But I was aware of a particular absence, the way you're aware of a sound that used to be there and now isn't, not constantly. But in the moments when things were quiet enough to notice, I'd gotten used to having something to look forward to. That was the honest truth of it. The 6:14 had stopped being a commute and started being the event of my day. The thing the day was building toward. And now it was just a commute again, and my days were just days again. And I was fine. I was fine. Late November, cold enough that I'd started wearing the heavier jacket. I was walking home from the train one night, different route than usual, longer. I'd been doing that sometimes just to take up more of the evening when I turned onto my block and stopped. There was a figure on the pavement across from my building. She was standing still, not pacing, not looking at her phone, just standing there in a dark coat, her hands at her sides, looking at my building. The porch light of the brownstone behind her threw warm yellow across the pavement. She turned when she heard my footsteps. We looked at each other across the street. Neither of us moved for a moment. The city made its sounds around us. A cab somewhere, distant music, the particular white noise of a cold city evening. My breath fogged slightly in the air. I crossed the street. We stood about 3 feet apart on the pavement outside my building, close enough to see her face clearly in the dim light. She looked like she'd been standing there long enough to have made the decision several times. "I found the building," she said. A slight pause. "I'm not sure what that says about me." "How?" I asked. "You mentioned your street once, the pharmacy on the corner." She looked at the pavement briefly. "I wasn't going to come. I came anyway. I didn't say anything. I chose distance," she said. "After the cafe. After Daniel. I thought it was the right thing, was it?" She looked at me, that direct look that had always undone something in me. "I don't know," she said, "but I couldn't stay away." There it was. 4 simple words that landed heavier than all the careful things we'd said to each other over 2 months of train rides. I couldn't stay away. Not dressed up, not qualified. Just the plain truth of it. Standing on the pavement in the cold, she didn't ask to come up. She stood there, hands at her sides, waiting but not in a demanding way. Waiting the way someone waits when they've given you something and understand it's yours to do with what you will. I looked at her. At the loose strand of hair that had worked its way out from under her collar, at her eyes gray-green in the dim light, at the white gold ring that caught the faintest gleam from the porch light behind her. "Come up," I said. "I won't tell you everything about that night. Some things belong only to the people who were in them. I'll tell you that my apartment had never felt so small or so warm. I'll tell you that we talked for a long time at my kitchen table. The kind of talking where you're not building toward anything, just being honest, which turns out to be its own destination. I'll tell you that she looked at my books and my cluttered desk and my single plant that was barely surviving, and she seemed, for the first time since I'd known her, completely unguarded. I'll tell you that we had a very warm night together, the kind that changes the way a person occupies space in your memory, permanently. And I'll tell you that when the light in my room began to shift from black to the particular deep blue a very early morning, she was already getting up, quietly. Not urgently, just with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood what before sunrise meant. I watched her from the bed as she found her coat, smoothed it, checked something in her bag. She paused at the door. "I don't have an explanation for any of this," she said softly. "I'm not asking for one." She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded once and opened the door and was gone. Her heel clicks quiet on the stairs, fading. I lay there in the early dark and listened to the city beginning to wake up. Distant traffic. A siren blocks away, a bird making a tentative sound outside the window. The vanilla of her perfume was still in the air. That was how the new pattern began. No labels, no promises, no version of this that could survive in full daylight or be explained to anyone who hadn't felt something similar. Just a quiet, irregular rhythm of presence, the train some evenings, the cafe occasionally, my porch light on when it was on, and the street empty when it wasn't. She came when she could. She left before the city fully woke up. We didn't talk about what it was. We didn't make agreements about what it would become. That's not what it was for. What it was for, I think, was the thing she'd told me in the cafe months ago, the thing about feeling seen. About someone paying attention to the specific shape of you, not the shape you were holding for everyone else. I saw her, and she saw me in return, the editor in the gray jacket who'd hid him behind his bag on the train for 3 years. Who'd built a routine like armor, who'd gotten so good at not wanting things that he'd nearly forgotten wanting was an option. She reminded me it was the last morning I'll tell you about, though it wasn't actually the last, just the one that stays clearest. I woke up before she left. I lay still and watched her. She was at the window, coat already on, looking out at the street below. The early light was that particular pale silver of November mornings. She had her arms folded loosely across her chest, and she was just looking at the city in the way that people look when they're letting themselves think. Something they usually don't let themselves think. She didn't know I was awake for a while. When she turned and saw my eyes open, she didn't startle. She just looked at me across the small room. "Go back to sleep," she said softly. "In a minute." She looked at me for another moment. Something moved across her face, something I didn't try to name. Then she turned back to the window. I lay there and watched the light change, and listened to her quiet presence in my apartment, and thought about the train, and the first evening, and those 4 words that had started everything. I have a secret. I thought about her knee against mine, the cafe in the rain, the forehead that almost touched mine, the empty seat for all those weeks that had felt like a held breath. She left before the street below had much traffic on it. The door clicked closed. I got up and made coffee and stood at the same window she'd been standing at, looking at the same street. That evening I rode the 614. Same seat, same hum beneath me, same flicker at Millbrook Street. Mr. Halpern in his usual spot. He glanced at me and gave the smallest of nods, and I gave one back, and that was enough. She wasn't on the train that night, but 2 evenings later, she was. She came through the car, found the row, sat down beside me. Her coat was the dark navy one. Her perfume arrived before she did. She looked at the window for a moment, then turned and looked at me, that direct, unhidden look, and something in her expression was quieter than it used to be. Settled. Almost we didn't speak for a while. The train moved. The city slid past the dark windows. Then her knee pressed lightly against mine. Neither of us moved. Some nights the porch light across the street is on when I come home. Some evenings she's on the train. She never did tell me what the secret was. But sitting here now, thinking back on all of it, the first whisper, the empty seat, the cafe in the rain, the early morning light in my apartment window, I think I already know. I think I was part of it. I think I always was. Some doors don't close. They just stop making noise.